I'm Chuck Black, and this is the Age of Ingenuity, our weekly chronicle of Canada's current innovation economy.
Hello, I'm Brian Orlotti, and here are a few of the stories we're tracking. And first up is a piece from CTV News Ontario titled Nokia to Join Province in New Underground NORCAT Venture by Ian Campbell. A multi-billion-dollar telecommunications company is joining forces with the province of Ontario and NORCAT to test some of the latest and innovative technology in an underground working mine. On Thursday, Minister of Energy, Northern Development and Mines Greg Rickford helped launch the SenGen Smart Mining Test Bed as part of the Next Generation Network program. Nokia will be helping to test state-of-the-art wireless communications in a bid to help companies develop and commercialize new technologies. It will include wearable sensors for detecting poisonous gases, drone mine mapping, and automated ore sorting. The Smart Mining Test Bed will play a key role in developing technologies that push the boundaries of traditional mining practices and create good jobs and opportunities in Ontario, said Rickford. The government's Next Generation Network program is a partnership between the Centre of Excellence in Next Generation Networks, SenGen, and the Ontario Centres of Excellence.
This seems to be a bit of a new thing for the mining industry in Canada. My understanding is that traditionally, Canadian mining operations have been trailing edge operations. Innovation, new technologies, the utilization of things like 5G networks are not the sort of things Canada's mining industry has traditionally utilized. They are far more into picks and shovels and dump trucks and stuff like that. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that has historically been true, although we've seen that very much change over the last 5 to 10 years, where Canadian mining companies are now eagerly adopting wireless technology, 4G, LTE, and now 5G in this case, and embracing technologies like drones for aerial mapping of mineral deposits, autonomous vehicles, or the huge dump trucks that carry ore from mining sites to processing facilities, Internet of Things applications in the mines themselves for remote monitoring of gases and various other sensors. So yeah, that has definitely changed.
My understanding as well is that the mining industry is one of Canada's largest industries, particularly outside Toronto, which you and I generally perceive as being the center of our universe, but it's not the center of the universe for most Canadians. My understanding from NORCAT, the Canadian government website, is that total Canadian mineral production reached 47 billion Canadian dollars in 2018. This is an increase of 4.3% over the previous year, and it's continued to keep going. It's one of the things Canada is known for. So it's good we're starting to take advantage of some of the new tools coming down the pipeline.
And next up is a piece from regalagriculture.com. AG manufacturers say uneven intellectual property rules could freeze them out of US-made machinery market. This piece is by Kelvin Hepner. Many of Canada's smaller farm equipment manufacturers are at risk of being left in the cold by the main US-based manufacturers if the Canadian government doesn't change its intellectual property rules, say representatives from a Saskatchewan-based company that builds attachments for harvesting equipment. Honeybee Manufacturing's general manager, Jamie Pegg, and Scott Smith, manager of components, systems, and integration, sounded the alarm in front of the House of Commons' standing committees on international trade and innovation, science, and technology in late February. The company builds headers for combines and swathers, employing around 160 people at its plant near Frontier, Saskatchewan, about 400 kilometers southwest of Regina, near the Montana border. They say the combination of uneven intellectual property rules in Canada and the US, along with the increasing use of proprietary tools by combine and tractor manufacturers to exclude third-party attachments, are threatening to put Canadian agricultural equipment manufacturers out of business.
This seems to be an example of a large manufacturer located in the States setting up barriers to entry to make it more difficult for smaller manufacturers and smaller companies in Canada and elsewhere around the world. To, so they can't compete. Essentially, they've got advantage of size, and they have the support of the American government, and now they're using the intellectual property rules in the States, which give them an advantage and allow them to essentially redesign their components so nobody else can fiddle with them. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, and it's more than a little ironic coming in the wake of the just ratified Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, the CUSMA. Although it is the embodiment of the America First doctrine at work.
I would argue that based on this story, what the Canadian manufacturers are asking for is for the government to give them more money so they can compete with the barriers to entry in place in the United States. I'm not really up for governments giving out money to create barriers and other governments giving out money to get around those barriers. It seems to me that over time, what happens is that nobody gives out anything except money from government, and no real solutions are ever solved. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, and I totally agree. And it's not really a question of money. It's more of a regulatory problem, and the need for Canadian regulators and U.S. regulators to reach some common ground and to see that regulations are fair and applicable with regard to this industry and other industries. Although again, within the current context of America First, that may or may not be possible.
How about I agree with that last point? I also think it's silly that so much of our innovation money is going to ways to innovate around legal barriers.
It smacks a little of the IT and computer industries in the 1980s and 90s. Some of their tactics. I recall Compaq Computer back in the day. One of their tactics that they used was to create a proprietary screw. It was called the Torx screw, which was on their computer cases and equipment. So nobody could open their cases because nobody had the tips for their screwdrivers. So you had to go to a service center to repair your Compaq. And we see that even to this day with companies like Apple, with for instance the new MacBook Pro computers, where the computer is not meant to be serviced by the user. The critical bits inside the computer are protected by various layers of cabling, cables upon cables, and tape and glue, and even the memory chips are soldered directly to the motherboard, so you can't even swap out your memory anymore. It's more things change, the more they stay the same.
Absolutely.
And next up is a piece from Global News. Coronavirus. Canadian company announces COVID-19 vaccine candidate, by
This is
Andrew Russell.
wonderful. This is wonderful. I can feel a cold coming on as we speak.
And God help anyone trying to find TP in the Greater Toronto area right now.
Agreed.
Piece by Andrew Russell. A Canadian company says it has made a breakthrough in the fight against the coronavirus outbreak, claiming to have developed a COVID-19 vaccine candidate that could begin human testing as early as this summer. Quebec City-based Medicago said it has produced a virus-like particle of the novel coronavirus, a first step toward producing a vaccine, which will now undergo preclinical testing for safety and efficacy. Medicago said it could begin human trials as soon as July or August if approved by Health Canada and other agencies.
Now, this is not the only company doing research in this area. My understanding is that there's a number of American companies, a number of European companies, maybe even one or two other Canadian companies who are all doing work in this area to come up with a vaccine for the coronavirus. And research in this area is ramping up through Health Canada and through American organizations and all around the world, to be honest. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, and it's a very encouraging sign that that Canadians can punch above their weight when they actually want to, and Canada may also have an edge in this area, Canada and Europe vis-a-vis the U.S. In that with our socialized Medicare systems and the tighter coordination between federal government entities like the uh, Public Health Agency of Canada and provincial ministries of health, we could see approvals for the vaccine and clinical trials begin quicker than we would in, for instance, the US's privatized healthcare system. And we've seen evidence for that in the current scattershot nature of the US's response to the coronavirus outbreak, with first responders not being given sufficient protective gear, gloves, and other tools and coronavirus testing kits. So in that sense, Canada may have an edge over the US.
How about it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. I do agree specifically that Canada has a number of government-funded organizations that have done very good work in the past for us and are continuing to do good work. Things like the Canadian Institute of Health Research, some of the organizations affiliated with major Canadian universities, and other organizations as well. So I think we are well placed to contribute to a solution to the coronavirus.
Yes, and also another interesting thing to note is that when not long after the coronavirus first emerged in Wuhan, China, some of the initial DNA sequencing of the virus was done here in Ontario, interestingly by the organization I work for, Orion, the Ontario Research and Innovation Optical Network, that operates a private fiber optic network that connects all of Ontario's universities and other research institutions. And they were able to share the gene sequencing data over that network and transfer humongous data sets between researchers and supercomputers.
I find that fascinating.
And this leads us to our last piece from MarketWatch, titled, "These industries are more likely to have layoffs if the coronavirus pandemic worsens, but one sector looks, quote, recession-proof." This is by Elizabeth Buchwald. "Coronavirus is officially a pandemic, and job experts say that news may spell trouble for some US workers more than others. Major cultural and sporting events across the country have been canceled. Broadway theaters went dark, starting at 5 p.m. Thursday. Producers said they hoped to resume shows on April 13th, according to a statement from the Broadway League, an organization of theater owners and producers. Declining consumer confidence, potentially severe retail traffic declines, and temporary store closures are evolving risk factors that depend on uncertain variables like the geographic spread of the virus and the timing of containment and eradication solutions," analysts at Cohen, an investment bank and financial services company, wrote in a note this month.
I hate to have to note on this article, but the lead has been buried well down to the 12th or the 14th paragraph, I think. The punchline of this story seems to be that the only industry that will undergo a veritable boom as a result of the coronavirus is healthcare jobs. People who need to protect the health of others. People, doctors, hospitals, home care workers, people like that. Is that a fair assessment?
It is, and buy all the stock in toilet paper makers and hand sanitizer makers you can. And those are the stories we're covering this week.
If you'd like to promote your event or activity, or if you think you have insight into Canada's current innovation economy, please send us an email to me at mrchuck.black@gmail.com. And that's all for this week. We'll be back next week with more stories covering our current age of ingenuity.